Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a fascinating and honestly kinda unsettling premise from Jonathan Cahn's book, The Return of the Gods. We're going to impartially investigate the chilling central mystery of this text. It's a book that basically blends ancient history, biblical narratives, and modern cultural critique into this massive puzzle. Our goal today? To map out exactly how the author pieces it all together, giving you a clear, structured look at its incredibly provocative message.
So what if the ancient gods never truly disappeared? It's a pretty dramatic thought, right? The book kicks things off by immediately hooking us with this exact concept. It asks us to stop and consider, what if the stories of these mysterious, powerful beings worshipped thousands of years ago were, well, more than just myths? It challenges us to look at ancient history not as some closed chapter in a textbook, but as a force that might actually still be active, lurking in the shadows.
And then the author hits us with an even bigger question. What if they are returning? The source material makes it absolutely crystal clear that this isn't meant to be just a dry history lesson about antiquity. No, it's framed as a stark warning about our modern times. The book asserts that the mysteries of the past are directly wired into the world we live in right now, setting up this whole investigation into how these ancient forces might literally be operating right under our noses.
Okay, let's dive right into this by starting at the beginning with Section 1, The Ancient Mystery.
To really grasp the book's modern warning, we first have to look at the historical background it lays out about the ancient entities worshipped in places like Babylon and Canaan. Thousands of years ago, entire civilizations bowed down to these strange beings. But from the biblical perspective presented in the text, these weren't just harmless idols carved out of stone or wood. The book emphasizes that behind these physical statues were actual spiritual forces, real powers of darkness actively influencing humanity. According to the source, these entities demanded sacrifices. They controlled entire nations, and they spread corruption, violence, and immorality everywhere they ruled.
Let's look at how this builds across a historical timeline. The book maps out this really distinct progression, starting with that ancient worship, where these gods supposedly had total dominion. But then, there's a huge shift, the spread of biblical faith. The source explains that this movement effectively pushed these ancient powers out of much of the Western world. Their physical temples fell, their altars were destroyed, and for centuries, their influence seemed to just completely fade away. But that leads us directly into the final phase of this timeline, the modern resurgence, and that is the core mystery the author wants us to solve.
And that brings us to Section 2, The Gods Return.
Now, this is where Jonathan Cahn drops his most shocking core thesis. He argues that these exact same ancient spirits haven't vanished at all. Instead, they're actively resurfacing and reclaiming territory in our current society. And this brilliantly illustrates the sharp contrast between how these entities operated back then versus right now. Anciently, they demanded giant statues and towering physical temples, but today, the book claims they've traded those stone altars for modern masks. Instead of demanding physical worship, they're infiltrating us through entertainment, through destructive new ideologies, and by seeding mass moral confusion. They might be hidden, but according to the text, their endgame remains exactly the same.
To make this a bit more concrete, the book breaks down 3 specific spirits in their modern masks. First up, there's Baal. Anciently, Baal was associated with rebellion and destruction, which the author links directly to the destructive ideologies tearing at modern societal foundations today. Then there's Ishtar. Historically linked to sexual obsession, the book connects her to today's distortion of identity and sexuality. And finally, there's Molech, an entity infamous for the sacrifice of children. The author maps Molech onto some really disturbing modern cultural parallels. He uses this whole framework to argue, pretty firmly, that when you look through this specific lens, our current headlines and social trends start to look remarkably and maybe terrifyingly familiar.
Which leads us into the third phase of the book's arc. Section 3, A Changing Modern World. Having laid out the ancient history and these specific entities, the source material turns its full attention to the rapid, honestly unsettling cultural shifts happening all around us. It connects prophecy, history, and modern politics to ask some incredibly tough questions, like why exactly has society changed so rapidly in such an incredibly short amount of time? Why do we keep seeing ancient esoteric symbols just popping up in our everyday entertainment and media? And why does traditional morality seem to be collapsing across the world all at once? The book uses these questions to argue that these events aren't just random coincidences. They're symptoms of a much deeper spiritual reality. This quote really captures the heavy warning at the heart of the author's argument. Civilizations in the past ignored spiritual corruption and eventually fell apart. The book uses this historical precedent to suggest that history is, well, literally repeating itself right before our eyes. The stark warning here is that modern society, despite all our amazing technological advancements, might be walking blindly down the exact same path to ruin if this underlying spiritual corruption just continues to be ignored.
So, the crucial point is that the book isn't just an exercise in pointing out the darkness. It shifts gears, bringing us to Section 4, the final warning.
Here, the text pivots from a bleak cultural critique straight into a proposed solution. It aims to equip readers with a strategy to actually respond to these perceived returning forces. The author outlines a very specific call to action. Step 1. Simply recognize the spiritual battle. Stop viewing societal shifts as purely political or social and start seeing the alleged spiritual forces behind them. Step 2 is a call to return to truth before it's too late. Step 3 challenges readers to stay spiritually alert at all times. And finally, Step 4 encourages individuals to actively question the culture around them, reminding us that not everything happening in society is just a random coincidence. It's basically a call for hypervigilance in a really confusing age.
We're going to wrap up this explainer with one final, totally provocative question straight from the heart of the source material. Are these ancient gods truly returning, or are these simply the echoes of history repeating itself once again? Whether you agree with every conclusion in Jonathan Cahn's book or not, the framework it presents absolutely forces you to think deeply about human nature, spirituality, and the overall direction our world is heading. It challenges all of us to look beyond the surface of our culture and stay curious about the mysteries of our past and how they might just be shaping our